There you go, Greg. Listen, man, thanks so much for joining us. You are a joy to follow on Twitter, to tell you that much. We've got a lot to talk about. I want to talk about your campaign. I want to talk about why in the hell you're still a Republican, all things considered. But help me out with have you had a chance to even look at what's going on with the jury verdict in the Ammon Bundy and his crew?
I've been trying to catch up as best I can on Twitter. So I've got a little bit of information, but not a whole lot.
So I mean, the crux of it is the jury found them not guilty because the court couldn't prove that they intended to prevent the federal workers from completing their job, right? There's a conspiracy to prevent federal workers from completing their task, and that's the charge that carried about 6 years worth of time, and the court wasn't able to prove it. But I'm wondering, in this type of scenario, how could they prove it? Because it really turns on how the jury views the story that Ammon Bundy, no matter what actually happened, it's how they view and how they sympathize and empathize with his plight. And he even threw in Dr. King for good measure. Like, he's like, he had to take a hard stand like Dr. King. And, all you got to do is throw out Dr. King and all of a sudden everything is all right in certain circles. So I don't know, man. I don't know if you have anything to say about that, but help us out. Like, say something smart and good like you do all the time.
Well, I mean, there are two pieces to it. So I think you're right. The issue of implicit bias with the jury is very real. There's actually a media story out just this morning about how juries, when they're giving civil verdicts, are more inclined to value a white person or a male, give them a higher dollar amount if, the case was out of New York about a child who was eating lead paint and now has permanent mental retardation. When they were suing for damages, the plaintiff's attorney, of course, made arguments about the life that he was going to have. He could have gone to high school, college, and everything else. And the defense attorney actually said, well, statistically, he's a person of color, so he's not going to have that type of lifetime earnings that a white kid would have.
Wow. And
the jury bought it. So implicit bias is a very real problem. It's especially a problem for those of us that do criminal defense work when most of our clients are, African Americans or Hispanic. But at the same time, you've also got to look at the prosecution and what they decide to charge.
Yeah.
If you look at the firearms charges, the particular portion of the United States Code that they were looking at has two different prongs to it. The first prong is just you brought a gun onto a federal facility. It's
right.
Very straightforward. There's no way I could envision the Bundys getting out of that, but it's only a 1-year prison term. The second prong can give you up to 5 years, but the state has to prove you intended to use the gun as part of the eventual crime. So that's why you saw during the trial Bundy's attorney saying, oh, this was just civil disobedience, nothing else. They're trying to cue up the argument that, yeah, they brought guns onto the facility, but they didn't intend to use the guns as part of the crime. If they can stop that piece of it, negate the intent piece, then that part, the not guilty verdict, isn't surprising.
Yeah.
But I agree with you on the bias part, but you also got to keep up on you got to force the U.S. attorneys to do a better job with prosecuting people.
Yeah. I mean, that's I would never forget the prosecuting attorney in the Trayvon Martin case, and that was not only the charges that were brought, but also the manner in which the trial was carried out. There's so many avenues of escape, and it just seems as though, to me, it just feels it's frustrating, Greg. It's so frustrating, especially when we juxtapose it to what's going on in North Dakota with the protests. But we'll get to all that. Thanks for saying what you did say, because you walked me back a little bit. All right, so let's talk about you. Let's talk about what you stand for. I remember the very first thing I found out about you. You were telling us the story on Twitter about one of the people that you represented, and I can't remember the story exactly, but it was a young black man that you represented, and you were basically using Twitter as a means of documenting the biases that you had to overcome on behalf of your client. I don't know if you recall that. That was about a year ago. Tell us if you recall any of those details. It doesn't have to be that in specific, but tell us a bit more about what you do as an attorney and what you run into in terms of race and racial biases and the things that you've had to overcome, especially those things that run counter to your party, because your party is not really buying all this implicit bias stuff.
They're not buying it at all. So the case you're talking about, I do a lot of work with students. And when I started my practice, I billed it as I was doing education law, but focusing on, kids in college. What that turned into quickly was a lot of criminal defense work, because frankly, the students get in trouble for underage drinking, possession of marijuana, silly stuff like that. So out of my first 10 clients, only one of them had like a bona fide education issue. Everyone else, it was a criminal defense case. So for this particular young man, he was a 17-year-old and was driving home from church. And you had two different versions of the story. So end result, he's charged with reckless driving to endanger. A neighbor called, said that he was doing donuts in the middle of the street, nearly hit and killed the guy's wife. That's the story that was told to police.
Right.
My client said, cat came out into the street. I tried not to hit it, slammed on the brakes. My car spun out. His mother, after the officer gave him the citation, came to his house, said, I don't believe you. I should take you to jail right now, blah, blah, blah. Officer that was actually involved in an officer-involved shooting, we found out, by the way, just a few years ago. The mom was very put off by the officer's interaction, went to the location of where this had supposedly happened and started taking pictures. Called me a couple days later. They came in, and it started out me getting the story from him. All right, I have to send mom out of the room to talk about attorney-client privilege and everything else. And one of the things that was weird for me was that when he was explaining the story, he started crying in my office. And I get it, some people can do the crocodile tears, but in what I do, the number of, black males in particular that I've seen, it's very unusual to have them shed a tear about something. You know what I mean? So that was already kind of, whoa, there's more to this than seems.
Right.
Got the mother's pictures next. Those of you that have an iPhone, if you've got location services turned on, that's going to be geotagged with the latitude and longitude, and it's going to have metadata on the time the picture was taken. So I looked at the pictures. The pictures didn't show donuts. I then went to the actual location from the geotag, took out a tape measure and measured the width of the street. And if you looked at the width of the street and the length of the car, it wasn't actually physically possible for him to have been doing donuts.
Right.
So we went to court, and the DA agreed to dismiss the case. I showed him the pictures, showed him the math. It didn't take long. I showed him what was up. He dismissed the case and moved on. And it really didn't dawn on me that in the officer's report, in his little citation where he explained what happened, he had actually written that he investigated and saw clear 360-degree skid marks on the street. Now, we all made it to high school at some point. 360 degrees is a circle. It was obvious from the pictures and the actual width of the street in the car that just wasn't a possibility.
Wow.
So when I left the courthouse, I posted on Facebook, hey, I got a dismissal. Was super happy about it. As I'm heading to lunch, it dawned on me, holy cow, this officer just put something that was completely BS in his citation. And I started tweeting about it. So if any of you folks watching, want to check my Twitter account, I've got it pinned at the top, because to this day, that's one of the craziest cases that I've had. It's something minor. It was only a traffic case.
Right.
But if someone in law enforcement is going to lie about that, what else are they going to be willing to lie about?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?